Clang! The sound was hideous. It was the sound of metal striking concrete, a discordant, violent noise that had no place in the sacred silence of the plaza. It was the sound of failure. The M1 Garand, a 9.5-pound instrument of war and ceremony, lay on the asphalt, its walnut stock chipped, its barrel pointing accusatorily at the boots of Private First Class Jenkins. "Pick it up." The voice of Staff Sergeant Vance didn't scream. It didn't have to. It was a low, vibrating growl that promised a lifetime of misery. Vance walked slowly toward the trembling private, his mirror-polished shoes crunching on the gravel. He stopped inches from Jenkins' face. Jenkins was 19 years old, sweating so profusely that his ceremonial blues were turning black under the armpits. He was terrified. "Do you know where you are?" "Private?" Vance whispered. "Do you know who is buried 50 yards from where you are standing?" The unknowns, Staff Sergeant," Jenkins stammered, staring straight ahead, tears mixing with the sweat. "And do you think the unknowns dropped their rifles when they were bleeding out in the Argonne?" Vance asked. "Do you think they fumbled when they were storming the beaches?" "No, they held the line. And you can't even hold a piece of wood and steel. If you have ever felt the crushing weight of expectation, if you know what it feels like to fail when everyone is watching, hit that like button. If you believe that excellence is the only option when honoring the fallen, comment Old Guard below. Because today, a young soldier is about to learn that true precision doesn't come from the hands. It comes from the soul. The sun was beating down on the practice pad behind the amphitheater. It was 90 degrees, humid, and the air was thick with pollen. The Honor Guard platoon was practicing for the centennial ceremony, the biggest event of the decade. Presidents would be there, generals, foreign dignitaries. The eyes of the world would be on them, and specifically on the silent drill team. They were attempting the inverted suicide spin. It was a move forbidden in standard manuals, reserved only for the elite of the elite. It required the soldier to toss the rifle, spin it 360 degrees horizontally while simultaneously rotating it vertically, and catch it blindly behind the back. It was physics-defying, and Jenkins had dropped it 6 times in a row. "Again," Vance ordered, "we stay here until you get it, or until you pass out. I don't care which comes first." Sitting on a weathered wooden bench under the shade of a lone oak tree was an old man. He had been there for an hour, feeding pieces of a stale bagel to a squirrel. He wore a checkered, button-down shirt tucked into high-waisted beige trousers and orthopedic shoes. His name was Miller. He was 80 years old. His hands were spotted with liver spots, and his left hand had a slight tremor. He watched the drill with a detached curiosity, his pale blue eyes following the rotation of the rifles. "He's gripping too tight," Miller mumbled to the squirrel. "He's choking the wood." Vance heard him. The sergeant spun around, looking for a target for his frustration. He saw the old man. "Can I help you, sir?" Vance barked. "This is a restricted training area. The tour bus stop is a mile south." Miller chewed on a piece of bagel slowly. He swallowed. "I know where the bus stop is, Sergeant. I helped pour the concrete for it in 1965. Vance rolled his eyes. "Another tourist with a story. Well, sir, unless you're here to enlist, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. You're distracting my men." "I'm not distracting them," Miller said, pointing a crust of bread at Jenkins. "The fear is distracting them. Look at the boy's shoulders. They're up to his ears. You can't spin a rifle if your trap muscles are locked. It throws off the center of gravity." Vance walked over to the fence that separated the practice pad from the park area. He leaned over, imposing and angry. "And I suppose you're an expert on drill and ceremony. You watch a few parades on the 4th of July and think you know the manual of arms." "I know enough," Miller said softly. "I know that the M1 Garand has a balance point exactly at the gas cylinder lock screw if the stock is standard issue. But that boy is holding it at the lower band. He's fighting the weight." Vance blinked. That was technically accurate, extremely accurate. But Vance wasn't about to be corrected by a civilian in front of his squad. "Listen, Pops," Vance sneered. "These are the finest soldiers in the United States Army. They train 12 hours a day. They don't need advice from the peanut gallery. Now, please, leave." Miller sighed. He brushed the crumbs off his trousers. He stood up, grabbing his cane. "All right, Sergeant. Just trying to help. Hate to see a good rifle hit the ground. Bad for the alignment." "Get back on the line," Vance yelled at Jenkins, ignoring the old man. "Pick it up. One more drop, Jenkins, and you are off the team. I will transfer you to Kitchen Patrol in Alaska. Do you hear me?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Jenkins screamed, his voice cracking. Jenkins bent down. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely grasp the stock. He lifted the rifle. He looked at his squad mates. They looked away, embarrassed for him. The pressure was suffocating. "Ready. Move," Vance commanded. Jenkins threw the rifle. He tried to initiate the spin, but his palm was slick with sweat. The rifle slipped. It didn't spin. It wobbled. It flew up, clipped Jenkins on the shoulder, and clattered onto the concrete again with a bone-jarring crack. Jenkins froze. He didn't bend down to pick it up. He just stood there, head down, defeated. He was broken. Vance threw his clipboard on the ground. "That is it. You are done. Get out of my sight." "Wait." The voice came from the gate. Miller hadn't left. He had opened the latch and walked onto the pad. He was moving faster than he had before. He walked right past Vance, the cane clicking rhythmically on the asphalt. He walked up to Jenkins. "Sir, you need to leave immediately." Vance stepped forward to intercept him. "This is a security breach." Miller stopped. He turned to Vance. He didn't look like a fragile old man anymore. He stood up straight, his spine uncoiled. He looked Vance in the eye, and for a second, Vance felt a chill run down his back. It was the look of a man who had stared down things much scarier than an angry staff sergeant. "The boy isn't finished," Miller said calmly. "He just needs to see how it's done." "How it's done?" Vance laughed, a cruel, incredulous bark. "By who? You? Sir, that rifle weighs 10 pounds. If you drop it on your toe, you'll shatter your foot. Go sit down before you hurt yourself." Miller ignored him. He looked at Jenkins. "May I, Private?" Jenkins looked at Vance, terrified. Vance crossed his arms. "Go ahead, Private. Give the man the weapon. Let's see the expert show us how it's done. Maybe when he throws his back out, we can finally get back to work." Jenkins handed the rifle to Miller. Miller took it. He didn't grab it. He received it, his hands, gnarled with arthritis, wrapped around the wood. He closed his eyes for a second. He felt the weight. He felt the history. The M1 Garand, the weapon that won the Second World War. The weapon he had carried for 3 years in the pouring rain, in the snow, in the sun. "Heavy, isn't it?" Miller whispered to Jenkins. "Yes, sir," Jenkins breathed. "It's only heavy if you carry it," Miller said. "If you dance with it, it's light as a feather." Miller opened his eyes. He stepped back. He looked at the squad. He looked at Vance. "Staff Sergeant," Miller said, "you called for the inverted suicide spin. High velocity." "That's the drill," Vance smirked. "Don't break a hip." Miller shifted his stance. He didn't take the wide, athletic stance of the young soldiers. He stood with his heels together, feet at a 45-degree angle, the classic position. He dropped his cane. It clattered to the ground. He didn't need it. Suddenly, Miller's right hand snapped the rifle up to port arms. The movement was so fast it made an audible snap as the leather sling hit the wood. Vance's smirk vanished. That wasn't the movement of an 80-year-old. That was the movement of a machine. Miller didn't hesitate. He launched into the drill. He threw the rifle into the air. It spun, but it didn't just spin. It blurred. The rotation was perfectly flat, perfectly centered. Miller didn't watch the rifle with his eyes. He looked straight ahead, his face a mask of stone. He caught the rifle behind his back with his left hand. Smack. The sound was crisp, loud, authoritative. He threw it back over his shoulder. He caught it with his right hand. Then came the impossible part. Miller brought the rifle down to his side. He balanced the heavy weapon on the tip of his index finger, right at the center of gravity he had mentioned earlier. "Watch the pivot," Miller said, his voice steady, not even winded. With a flick of his wrist, just the wrist, he sent the rifle spinning like a propeller on the tip of his finger. It whirred. It was a kaleidoscope of wood and steel. The sheer momentum kept it glued to his finger. It was defying gravity. The recruits' mouths dropped open. Jenkins' eyes were saucer-wide. Even Vance took a step back, stunned. Miller spun it for 10 seconds. The rifle was a blur. Then, with a sudden, violent upward thrust, he launched the weapon 20 feet into the air. It soared against the blue sky, spinning end over end. Miller stood perfectly still. He didn't look up. He extended his right arm out to the side, palm open. He waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The rifle came down. Miller caught the rifle mid-spin, snatching it out of the air with a grip of iron. He caught it at the exact moment it was vertical. The buttstock slammed into his palm, but his arm didn't waver an inch. He froze in the position of order arms. The rifle grounded next to his foot, perfectly aligned with the seam of his trousers. The silence on the practice pad was absolute. You could hear the distant traffic, the wind in the trees, the heavy breathing of the stunned soldiers. Miller held the pose for 5 seconds, a statue of perfection. Then, slowly, he relaxed. He leaned the rifle against his leg and bent down to pick up his cane. The fragility returned. The tremor in his hand came back. He was just an old man again. "Jesus," Jenkins whispered. Vance walked over. He moved slowly as if approaching a bomb. He looked at the rifle, then at Miller. "Who are you?" Vance asked. His voice was no longer arrogant. It was humbled. "That move, that finger spin, that hasn't been taught in the manual since 1960. That's the sentinel's whir. Nobody does that anymore. It's too dangerous." Miller leaned on his cane, catching his breath. "It's not dangerous if you respect the balance, Sergeant." Miller looked at Jenkins. "You were trying to muscle it, son. You were trying to force the rifle to do what you wanted. You can't force it. You have to guide it. The rifle wants to spin. It wants to fly. You just have to give it permission." Vance looked closely at Miller's face. He looked at the scar on his chin. He looked at the piercing blue eyes. Suddenly, a memory from a history book flashed in Vance's mind. A black and white photo in the hallway of the barracks. "Wait," Vance said, his eyes widening. "Miller, Thomas Miller, the Iron Sentinel." Miller smiled, a shy, crinkly smile. "It's been a long time since anyone called me that." Vance gasped. He turned to his squad. "Platoon, attention!" The soldiers snapped to attention, confused but obedient. "Do you know who this is?" Vance shouted, pointing at the old man. "This is Sergeant Major Thomas Miller. He walked the mat at the tomb of the E.R. Trahorn. Unknown soldier for 6 years. 6 years. He holds the record for the longest continuous guard duty in the history of the regiment. He guarded the unknowns during the blizzard of 1968 when the governor told them to stand down, and he refused to leave his post." Vance looked at Miller with pure awe. "Legend says he never dropped a rifle. Not once. In 6 years. "I dropped it once," Miller corrected softly. "In practice. 1959. My sergeant made me sleep with it for a month. I never dropped it again." Vance shook his head. "Sir, I apologize. I had no idea." "Don't apologize for defending your training ground, Sergeant," Miller said. "You're doing your job. But go easy on the boy. Fear makes the hands slippery. Pride makes them sticky. You need calm hands." Miller walked over to Jenkins. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Here, Miller said. He took Jenkins' hand and placed it on the rifle stock. He moved the fingers half an inch up. Hold it here. Feel that. That's the heartbeat. Now close your eyes. Jenkins closed his eyes. Don't think about the crowd, Miller whispered. Don't think about the president. Don't think about the sergeant screaming at you. Just think about the men in the ground. You're performing for them, and they aren't judging you. They are just glad you're there. They're just glad they aren't forgotten. Miller patted Jenkins's shoulder. Try it now. Jenkins took a deep breath. He felt the balance point. He visualized the spin. He threw the rifle. It spun. It was clean. It was fast. He reached back. He caught it. He brought it around. He caught it again. Yes, the squad cheered. Jenkins opened his eyes, a massive smile breaking across his face. I did it. I caught it. Good, Miller nodded. Now do it 1,000 more times, until you can do it in your sleep, until you can do it while bleeding. Miller turned to leave. Sir, Vance called out, will you stay? Watch the rest of the drill. We could use the critique. Miller paused at the gate. He looked back at the young men, the future of the Guard. He saw the respect in their eyes. He saw the fire. I can't, Miller said, checking his old wristwatch. My granddaughter is picking me up. She gets mad if I'm late for bingo. He opened the gate. But Sergeant, Miller added. Yes, Sergeant Major? You got a good squad there. Just remind them. The uniform doesn't make the soldier. The soldier makes the uniform. Miller walked out of the park, shuffling slowly, the cane taking his weight. The squad watched him go, the iron sentinel disappearing into the mundane world of tourists and traffic. Vance turned back to his platoon. He picked up his clipboard. All right, Vance said, his voice calm, focused. You heard the Sergeant Major 1,000 times, from the top. And Jenkins? Yes, Staff Sergeant. Move your hand up half an inch. Hoo-ah, Staff Sergeant. The drill began again, but the sound was different now. The smacks were crisper. The spins were tighter. The fear was gone. They weren't just practicing a routine anymore. They were carrying a torch. A torch passed to them by an old man with a cane and a bagel, who showed them that greatness has no expiration date. We often look at the elderly and see what they have lost. Their youth, their strength, their speed. We forget to look at what they have kept. We forget that inside the weathered frame of a grandfather is the heart of a lion that once roared. Sergeant Major Miller proved that skill is etched into the bones. He showed us that true mastery isn't about showing off. It's about passing it on. He didn't spin that rifle to humiliate the recruits. He did it to liberate them. If this story made you stand a little taller, if you have respect for the old guard and the sentinels who watch over our heroes, smash that subscribe button. Share this video with a veteran, a soldier, or anyone who needs to know that the old dogs still have the best tricks. Honoring the past is the only way to secure the future. Keep your head high, your eyes front, and your grip steady,